wonderful month. We are on today's daf is daf kuf. We are the last few lines of Tzadi Tes Summit Base 99b. Ilan hamesach ala aretz. If you have a tree whose canopy is not only wide, but also hangs down. So we're dealing with a weeping willow or a tree like that, where the canopy of the tree is not only wide, but also hangs down towards the ground. And it is completely surrounding beneath the tree. And the edges of the tree are that are hanging, the branches that are hanging down and to the ground are within 3 tefachim of the ground. Essentially, that creates a proper wall. And even though that there's a gap, as long as the gap is less than 3 tefachim, it's fine. So you have a complete wall and airspace within it. So somebody can carry within the area beneath the tree because it is completely enclosed, both around and above the space. Now, you don't need the above in order to carry, but it is completely surrounding. As long as Gevaya min haaretz shlosh tefachim, it's no more than 3 tefachim above the ground. So that creates a lavud, and you're allowed to carry there. Metaltal and tachtav, so you can carry beneath there. The next line of the Mishnah is going to deal with another halacha, which we've seen before, that you're not allowed to use a tree on Shabbos, lest you come to break off a branch or tear off some of the leaves, and we'll see more in the Gemara about that. And the Gemara wants to address not the tree, but roots coming out of the tree that are within 3 tefachim of the ground. Essentially, would count as ground, not as tree, and you're allowed to sit on them and you're allowed to utilize them as opposed to the trunk of the tree. So too, if you had branches coming out of the trunk right at the root area, that would count as a root, not as a tree, because it's within 3 tefachim of the ground. So here we say, Shorashav, Gavoy min haaretz gimel tefachim leyeshuv alei. If the roots protrude upward from the ground more than 3 tefachim, you should not sit on them, meaning you cannot utilize that branch because it's more than 3 tefachim off the ground. In this particular idea, we'll see, the Gemara is going to address it more, but at this point we think that we're talking about a root that comes up from the ground and then heads back down, and it's sort of like a bump out of the root out of the ground, with root sticking up more than 3 tefachim, but then goes back down. Amar Rav Huna b'Rei Rav Yeshua. So the Gemara has a quote from Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, a metaltalin bo yosem beis hasayim. This idea that you're allowed to carry under this tree because the branches come down far enough to the ground that it creates not only a canopy, but also creates a wall, essentially a barrier that's it reaches all the way down to within 3 tefachim of the ground. But there's a maximum size that this enclosure, quote unquote, this enclosure of branches around them can be. And the maximum size would be beis hasayim, 70 by 70 or 100 by 50. My time. What's the reason? Even if you enclose this with intent, meaning you planted this tree with the intent that it's going to grow such branches and create a living space for you beneath there. Nevertheless, it's not proper living space. It's only going to be as someone who wants to watch the fields out there, or it's not a house. It's not living space. It's temporary living for someone who is protecting a field, who is on the lookout, or whatever it may be. So that's called tashmisha la'avir. It's there for airspace. It's there for usage not of the living within that space itself. So that would have the same halachas as a non-living space, where the maximum enclosure it can be is 100 by 50, 70 by 70, or what we call a beis hasayim. But beyond that, it now looks like a non-rishus hayachin, and the Chachamim said you're not allowed to carry beyond that space. So that's really the halacha is what we call a karpev, a wood storage area. So obviously this is not a wood storage area, but it has the same halacha. It's an enclosure not made for typical living, and therefore the max is beis hasayim. Shirashav gavoy min haaretz. The last halacha of the Mishnah was the halacha of the roots coming out, and that you're not allowed to use a tree, but the roots coming out of the ground within 3 tefachim of the ground count as the ground, and you are allowed to use them. And the roots coming above that you may not use. Say itmer. So it was said shirashei ilan habayim milamala, if they're coming from the from above downward. Mishloisha l'toch shloisha. They're coming from above 3 tefachim off the ground down into 3 tefachim from the ground. So at one point, or they're coming from higher than 3 tefachim above the ground, so they're independent and therefore count as a part of the tree, and you're not allowed to utilize it on Shabbos. But it's coming downward into the space that you are allowed to use. So Rabba Amma Mutal Ishtamish. Rabba says you're allowed to that you're allowed to utilize the part that's below the 3 tefachim. And Rav Shesha Samar Asal Ishtamish Ben. And Rav Shesha says that you're not allowed to utilize this. You're not allowed to sit on it. Stand on it. You can't put items on it. Rabba Amamutal Shamish Bem. So the Gemara explains that Rabba says you are allowed to utilize it. The Chalpachas Megimel the Ara Arahi. Anything that's less than 3 tefachim from the ground is essentially part of the ground. So even though that some part of it is protruding above, but the part that's not, you're allowed to utilize. Rav Shesha Sama Asal Shtamish Ben. Rav Shesha says you may not use it. The Kiva the Mekoyach Isur Ka'asi Asurin. Since they are coming from a space that is prohibited, they too are also prohibited. And it's similar, Kamashonisa, it's similar to a mound, just like a mound that's above a certain height would get a certain halachic space, even though that its sides, as they come down, are going to be lower than that halachic space, since it's a part of the rock or mound above that space. It would be would get the status of the area above. So just as we understand that in a rock, a mountain, a mound, a pile of dirt, that even the area within 3 tefachim of the ground, being that it's a part of this big boulder or this mound of dirt, it's all going to be one halachic status. So to this branch, even though that right now this part of the branch is below the 3 tefachim and could be considered part of the ground, but it's a part of a branch that goes above and comes back down, and therefore that above area is going to be prohibited to be used, as it's no longer a part of the ground and it counts as a branch of the tree. So too the part that comes below. Now the Gemara explains, the salkin le'ela, the ones that are just going upward and are not heading down at all, everybody would agree that would count as a branch that's prohibited to use, because it's sort of like a branch of the tree, even though that the base of it is at a root, or it's essentially a new shoot coming up because it's heading upward and not coming back down within 3 tefachim. So everybody agrees you cannot utilize that tree, that branch of the tree, or that root. The nachten latata, the ones that that come out and never really go, even though they come up a bit and come back down, and right now are not above 3 tefachim, everybody agrees you're allowed to utilize that, even though that eventually it may continue to grow and expand and become above 3 tefachim. Right now, it doesn't reach above 3 tefachim and it comes back down to the ground. So you're allowed to utilize that one. So everybody agrees that. Let's dadim pluta. However, the one that comes up a little bit above 3 tefachim and then heads back down, that's the one that there's a disagreement about. The Rabba v'Rav Sheshas. That's the machlokes of Rabba and Rav Sheshas, where Rabba says you cannot utilize the part that's above 3 tefachim, but the rest of the branch that's below 3 tefachim you may use. And Rav Sheshas says no, since it's coming from a part that's above 3 tefachim, you may not use the rest of it either. V'chein anigra, and they disagree as well about a tree that's in a ditch. The tree itself is in a ditch, and if you measure certain branches or roots that are coming out and go into the walls of the ditch or right above the ground, that it may be 3 tefachim from the base of the tree or 3 tefachim from the depth of the ditch. But as far as the ground around it and above it, it actually is level or within 3 tefachim of the ground above. So there too, Rabbah is going to say that you can be lenient and you can utilize the branches, because after all, to the ground that you're standing on, it's within 3 tefachim of the ground. And Rav Shesha says, no, you have to be strict, because you will look at the base of the tree and it is more than 3 tefachim from the base of the tree, from the ground where the tree itself is, which is in the ditch. V'chein b'keren zavius. And take it one step further and say, if you have a corner of a wall around your courtyard and there's a tree right in the corner, and there are branches that are coming out of the tree, it's actually a branch of the tree. However, it's right on the corner. So from its perspective, which is that the branch is coming out in the corner, from its perspective, it's completely surrounded by something that is right there. So it's really within 3 tefachim of this wall. So Rabbah is going to say, okay, so you can utilize it because that branch is essentially a root within 3 tefachim. And Rav Shesha says, no, we look at the base of the tree, and to the base of the tree, this is more than 3 tefachim, obviously, and so therefore you may not use it. Similarly, the Gemara is going to tell a story about the root of about a tree that was actually in the house of Abaye, and even though that from the inside of the house you could see the base of the tree and the branches of the tree, but from the roof of the house, where the tree protruded only a little bit, even the top of the tree would count within 3 tefachim, and you can utilize the top of that tree according to Rabbah. Ha'hu dikla, this dekel, this palm tree, that Abaye had, v'hava salik bi'ipuma, and it was within the structure of the house. So they built the house around this palm tree, and the top of it came out from like a skylight, from a hole in the roof. Of Yosef, and they came before Rav Yosef. Misharale, and Rav Yosef allowed the usage of these branches that were above on the roof, because they were within 3 tefachim of the roof. So even though that from the inside of the house you saw an entire tree, but from the roof all you had was a 3 tefachim. So these all counted as branches within 3 tefachim of the ground. So too 3 tefachim of the roof. Amar v'achaber tachlifa shar lecha karabba. He allowed it to you like Rabbah, who had said that any branch within 3 tefachim of the ground, and not only 3 tefachim of the ground, but even if it's 3 tefachim of another space, is going to be permissible. So anyone says Pshita, Obviously, this is based on Rabbah, because after all, Rabbah is the one that said that even that this halacha that we're going to look at the branches where they are now and not where they came from within the tree. Mao the Tema Filul Rav Sheshes, and because the Gemara says no, because we may have thought that Rav Sheshes would agree over here, because Beisa Kaban the Mal Yadamis, since there's a roof around the house, it's considered like it's entirely filled. That would be different than the wall. So it's Beisa Kaban the Mal Yadami. It's like the house is completely filled. And you can use this. And you're allowed to use within 3 tefachim of the roof. Kamash Malan. So that's what it tells us, that no, that this is according to Rabbah and not Rav Sheshes. John, we're on Kuf Amid Aleph 100A, the second wide line. Tanan. Shrashav Gavay Minaretz Gimel Tefachim. We learned that if the roots of a tree are more than 3 tefachim off the ground, you're not allowed to sit on them, because that essentially, even though that it's a root and it's a part of the ground, since it protrudes more than 3 tefachim out of the ground, it's essentially like a tree. And we know that a tree you're not allowed to utilize. Maybe you're going to break some of it, so you can't climb it, you can't go up, you can't go down, and you can't take things out of it or put things on it. So you can't sit on this branch, this tree. The root of the tree, just like you couldn't sit on a branch. And one says, hey, no. So what's the case over here that it's above 3 tefachim? Idala hadri kipi, if it doesn't come and bend back down, shita, it's above 3 tefachim. Why should you be allowed to use it? Elalav afagav the hadri kipi. Wouldn't you say even though it comes back down? And that seems to contradict Rabbah. Rabbah said that if it comes back down, the area that's below, you're allowed to use it. Or it contradicts Rav Sheshes, who says that because the Mishnah would be indicative of that you can't sit on the part above 3 tefachim, but below you can. Perhaps it doesn't come back down at all. And this is what it's referring to. It's referring to a case that afagav the tzida echad shava la'aretz. It's talking about a root or a branch that comes out of a tree and it is completely flat. 3 tefachim above the ground, so it's not a part of the ground. However, maybe it protrudes, let's say, 10 feet, and at 8, 9 feet, the ground starts coming up towards the branch. And now you have a branch that while at the base of the tree, it's above 3 tefachim, but as it comes out longer, the branch is exactly at 3 tefachim, or lower than 3 tefachim, because the ground itself starts coming up towards the branch. And nevertheless, you're not allowed to sit on this branch because it is a branch from the tree, even though it may be a root technically, but it acts like a branch of the tree because it's above 3 tefachim from the ground, and you're not allowed to utilize it, sit on it, stand on it, put items on it, because because it is above 3 tefachim. Tana Rabbana. So the Brisa taught, Shrashi ha'ilon shegavay min aretz gimel tefachim. If you have roots from the tree of more than 3 tefachim above the ground, oshi yesh chalal tachteihen gimel tefachim. Or even if the root is not above 3, there's a airspace below 3 tefachim beneath this branch or this root. Even if one side is completely level with the ground, but one area has an airspace of more than 3 tefachim, essentially whether it comes up and goes back down, or whether it's flat, but the ground comes back up. You may not sit on that area that's more than 3 tefachim above the ground, because you're not allowed to go up on a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to hang anything on a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to even lean on a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to go up on a tree even before Shabbos. Because kolayom and remain in that place the rest of the day. So you're not allowed to go up on a tree and remain on the tree the rest of the day. Echad ilan, and this is true for a tree. Me'echad kol behema, and this is true for any animal. You're not allowed to go on before Shabbos and sit there for the rest of Shabbos. You're not allowed to climb it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to climb down. And as we saw in Gemara Shabbos, this may be a related halacha in as much that not riding an animal could be because you're going to take a branch off, tear a branch off to create a switch to get the animal moving. However, bor siach ma'ara v'geder, a pit, a ditch, or a fence, there, regardless of how high it is or how low it is, metapes v'ola, you're allowed to climb up. Metapes v'yored, you're allowed to climb down. And even if it's 100 amma deep or high, you're allowed to climb. Climbing is not the issue. The issue is that the tree is an issue because you may come to break a branch or a leaf or tear something off. So Tanechadem ala mutaleri. We have one brisa that says, even though it says you're not allowed to climb a tree and come back down, if you did go up, you're allowed to come down. The Tanechada asaleri. And there's another brisa that says if you went up, you may not come down. So what's the distinction? Lakasha. Kan meba'od yom, kan meshachashecha. It depends whether you're going up meba'od yom from you went up before Shabbos. Kan mechashecha if you climbed up on Shabbos. If you climbed up before Shabbos, you had not you had not transgressed when you went up, and therefore you're allowed to come down. But if you climbed up on Shabbos, which was a transgression, you cannot come down because maybe on the way down you're going to break something. That's one distinction the Gemara proposes. And if you want, you can say, no, in both cases he climbed up when it was Shabbos. However, nevertheless, there's the two brises. It depends whether he did so intentionally or not. If he climbed up intentionally, we're going to say, sorry, you cannot come down on Shabbos because maybe you're going to break a branch. However, if you climbed up unintentionally, not knowing that it's prohibited, and someone says, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, come back down, you're allowed to come down. Or we say, no, both are talking about unintentionally. Intentionally, everybody would agree you're not allowed to come down. But unintentionally, there's a question whether we're going to not allow you to come down, even though you did it unintentionally, on account of those that go up intentionally. Is there a penalty for going up unintentionally on account of those that do it intentionally? One says that we're going to penalize you even though you did it unintentionally. And say no, you cannot do it. And we do not penalize you for going up unintentionally, and you can come back down. So this seems like another machlokes that has seemingly nothing to do with our case. It has nothing to do with our case, but it's the same idea of whether or not when something is done unintentionally, we're going to allow you to continue utilizing the transgression, if you would. Over here, you climb up, and in order to come down, you have to continue climbing on the tree. And so, are we going to allow you to continue that, or tell you no, stop where you are? So this case is in regards to karbanos that got mixed up. And so now you have blood of one carbon mixed with blood of another carbon. And the carbon, the blood has to be put on the mizbeach. Now, different karbanos have different halachas. Some have a single spritz of blood, and some have shtayim shem arba, two that are four, so on two corners, which end up going on the four sides, or there's actually four places to put it on each one of the corners on the mizbeach. So now we have a problem. If the blood of the two karbanos that got mixed together are one, the same halacha, so great. So you can just do the one and fulfill it for both. But if they're different, then you're going to have a different obligation for each one. So we are on 100A, about a third from the bottom. So ketanoi like this machlokas hanitanim b'matana achas. Blood of a korban that is placed on the mizbeach in one corner, just placed a single place spritz on the mizbeach. Shenis arva b'natanim b'matana achas, and they got mixed up with the blood of another korban that is only placed in a single place. So that would be, let's say, a korban pesach mixed with a korban pesach, or something like that. They get one single spritz and they got mixed up. So you can do one single spritz and it'll work for both. So you could place it in a single placement, spritz on the mizbeach, and it'll count for both of them. Similarly, matan dalid b'matan dalid. The blood of, let's say, a chatas, which has four, it needs to be placed on the four corners, or an ola, which we said is a korban that gets a spritz on two corners, but the corners are each corner it spreads onto the two sides, so essentially on four sides of the mizbeach. So two olas get mixed up, and two chatas get mixed up. So then you would spritz them again, do the same as you would normally do, and it would count for both. Matan dalim and matan dalim, and also matan dalim. So just give a four spritz on the mizbeach, and that works for both of the karbanos. However, here's the problem: matan arba b'matan achas. You have a korban that really requires a single spritz, and it was mixed with a korban that requires four spritz, whether two, like an ola, two that equals four because it goes on the four sides of mizbeach, or a chatas, which is four individual spritzes. Tosfos says it can't be a chatas for whatever reason, because they would be a different space on the mizbeach. Be that as it may, but we have a korban that gets a single spritz, like a korban pesach, that gets mixed up with a korban that requires multiple spritzes, either two or four, and now what are you going to do? So if you do more than the required spritzes, let's say this is a korban pesach, and you did more, you've transgressed by adding a spritz. And we saw a few days ago that there's a concept of Baal Tosef. You're not allowed to add to a mitzvah, and if the mitzvah is to spritz once and you spritz multiple times, you're adding to the mitzvah. However, if it requires more than one spritz and you only did one, you've minimized the mitzvah. And that's also, the Torah says lo tigra. You should not minimize a mitzvah. So Rabbi Eliezer says, go ahead and do the four spritz, even though that you may be considered adding to the mitzvah, but that's the requirement here. This may require a greater amount of spritzes, so you have to do it. And Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua says you have to give it a single spritz, because you're not allowed to add to a mitzvah. And as Rashi points out, that as a general rule, we say that any korban that's outside on the outside mizbeach, if you only did a single spritz, even if it requires more, it will the korban will be effective. It'll count as it'll count as a valid korban. And even though that if it's a chatas or if it's an ola, you've minimized what it requires, nevertheless, it's better to fulfill the mitzvah and not do it completely than actively transgressing, as Rabbi Yeshua is going to explain his argument to Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, how can you do that? You're minimizing a mitzvah because perhaps it requires more. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua said, great. But if you would tell him to continue spritzing and do the four spritz, four placements of blood on the mizbeach, well, then he's going to add to the mitzvah. And if it's a carbon pesach, he's transgressing. Amar Rabbi Eliezer le'amru ela kashu ba'atzma. Well, that's only said if it's alone, but over here he's not doing it in order to add to the mitzvah. Here he's doing it because he's not sure whether it requires it. So he's doing it on account of maybe it needs it. Same is true in not taking away from a mitzvah. And the reason why he's not doing more is because maybe it doesn't require it. He's not doing it because he's minimizing the mitzvah. Either way, he's doing the same. He's doing the same thing. And here Rabbi Yeshua adds his point. And furthermore, Rabbi Yeshua said, if you add the extra spritzes, you not only transgress the Torah prohibition of adding to a mitzvah, but you did so actively. You did it as an act, with your hands, you transgressed. However, but in my version, in my opinion, where I say, no, just do the one spritz and it'll be a valid carbon, and even though that you're minimizing from the mitzvah, potentially, because maybe it requires more, and you're doing less, it's true you may transgress, but you didn't do so actively, you did so passively. You didn't do an action, and that's why you transgressed. The way you're saying, Rabbi Eliezer, you want to transgress, or potentially transgress actively. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara wants to compare it to our question here and say that Rabbi Yeshua says over there, do what you need to not transgress, even though you may be transgressing actively. So too over here, do what you need to get off that tree, which is a transgression on Shabbos, even if you need to do so by actively transgressing, by utilizing the tree and getting down. However, Rabbi Yeshua, where according to Rabbi Yeshua, it says over there, just don't do anything. If you're not sure whether it's a mitzvah or not, and whether you're going to transgress or not, just stay where you are, and Sheval Tasa, sit and don't do anything, meaning be passive and remain as is better. Sahachanami layerid. So to over here, we would say, do not come down. The Gemara says no comparison. I can make clear differences in both opinions. Perhaps that's not so. Adkan leka Rabbi Eliezer Hassam. Rabbi Eliezer only said it over there, where kumasei adif, that it's better to go ahead and not transgress the potential prohibition of minimizing a mitzvah. Elo de kavid mitzvah, because there's also potential that you're doing a mitzvah, because there may be a requirement, as he said to Rabbi Yeshua, you're minimizing a mitzvah. In other words, there is a potential, if this actually is the ola or the chatas and not the carbon pesach, you actually have to put more, do another spritz on the mizbeach. You have to put more blood on the mizbeach, and you didn't. So since there is a potential mitzvah, he says, go ahead and do so. Aval hacha, but by the tree, delavid mitzvah, you're not. There's no mitzvah by coming down. So maybe he would agree that it's better to be passive and just remain where you are, and not utilize the tree more by coming down, which is going to be a transgression. It's over here. Maybe you shouldn't come down. The inami, or I could say the reverse as well. Ad kan lekam Rabbi Yeshua Hasam, and Rabbi Yeshua said over there, be passive and don't do more. Sheval Tasa Adif, he says it's better to not do anything. And now we go to Kuf base 100b. Ella, it's only true Deloika Avidi Surah, where you're currently, if you don't do anything, you're not actively doing a transgression. But when you're sitting on the tree, wherever you are on the tree, you're utilizing the tree, that in and of itself is a transgression. Maybe there's more chance of breaking a branch as you try coming down. Yeah, indeed. But being passive is also within the transgression. You're sitting on the tree. So maybe Rabbi Yeshua would say, you know what? Instead of sitting on the tree and utilizing the tree for 12 hours, come down and utilize it for these 5 minutes, and then you're done. So there's no proof, no comparison to that halach over there by the korban, whether Rabbi Yeshua says be passive and don't add the extra spritzes because we don't know whether it requires it or not, or like Rabbi Eliezer, who says, go ahead and do it because you have a mitzvah to do, even though you potentially are adding to a korban. That's a discussion over there and has nothing to do with our case. In our case, where you currently have a transgression of sitting on the tree that you're not allowed to do, and there's no mitzvah to come down, they would not be comparable. So the Gemara says we have multiple brises. Tani Chada, one brisa says Echad ilal nach ve'echad ilal yavish, that this prohibition of utilizing a tree is regardless of whether the tree is dried out or the tree is still moist and fresh. You're not allowed to utilize it. Tani idach, however, there's another brisa that says b'medvar murim belach. It's only where it's a fresh living tree. So there, if you break something off, you're essentially breaking it from its life source, from the ground. However, aval b'yavish, but if it's a dried out tree, even though you're not supposed to break off a branch, but if you by mistake in utilizing the tree or climbing the tree, you break off a branch, it's already detached from the ground anyhow, essentially, because it's dead. So mutter, so you're allowed to climb it. Amar Rav Yehuda lekasha. Rav Yehuda says these are not contradictory brises. They're just talking about two different things. Kan m'shagizer machlif. Kan m'shagizer machlif. One is where it is the type of tree that even though a branch or two dries out, but the tree regenerates, and therefore it counts as it's still attached to the ground, and you're not allowed to utilize it even if it's dried out. And the other is when the brisa that says it's permissible is when it doesn't regenerate. So where it says, what are you talking about? Gizer machlif yavish karisle. If it regenerates, you're calling it dried out. The whole idea of this dried out tree is that it's no longer considered attached to the ground. And if you break off a branch, you will not have detached harvested. You will not have detached something from the ground. If it regenerates, of course it's still considered attached to the ground. So rather, the distinction is whether it's in the summer or the winter. In the winter, all trees look like they're dead. So nobody's going to know whether or not you're climbing a dead tree or a live tree. It looks like you're climbing a live tree. In the summer, however, where all trees have leaves and they look alive, there's a dead tree, people will know you're climbing a dead tree, and even if you break something off, you're not detaching from the ground. So Gemara says, wait, if it's in the summer, hanatri peri, even a dead tree may still have some fruit left over. Midoleka peri, no, there's no fruit left over, and so there's going to be no harvesting. Vakanatri kinsi, maybe it still has some small leaves and stuff on it. So the Gemara says, no, begeduda, it's a completely dried out branch that has nothing on it. The Gemara says, Eini, it's not so. Varav ikla la pastia. Rav came to this place of Pastia. He told them they can't even climb on these dried trees that have no leaves on them. So the Gemara says no. Rav bikab matzah v'gada bageder. It's a metaphor. Rav found an open field that was not fenced in, and he put a fence in that because it was necessary. And the meaning of that is that the inhabitants of Pastia didn't really understand the halachas and didn't know the various halachas of whether it was permissible or not, why it would be permissible, a dried out tree, a live tree, and he saw that they didn't understand the distinctions and didn't know, and he was afraid that if he tried telling them that this tree is permissible, that tree you cannot climb on, they would not understand and would continue utilizing all trees, and so that's considered an open field. It's ripe for mistakes happening or people stealing from the garden, and so Gadar Bagadar, he put up a fence, meaning he realized that it would need to just say no climbing trees, period, for these people so that they not transgress. Amar Rabbi Ami. Amar Rabbi Barabba, Amar Ravasi, Asal Adam Shehalcha Gabi Asavim Shabbos. So Rabbi Barabba said, you're not allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos because you're going to tear some of the grass out. Mishum shenema, as it says in the verse, v'atz baraglayim chote. Somebody who essentially pushes with his leg, somebody as he walks can transgress sin with his feet. So we have two brises that contradict each other. One says you're allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos, and one says you're not allowed. So the Gemara is going to propose multiple distinctions and ultimately come to the conclusion, which is the halacha, that since we say davar she'ein mischaben muter, since the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, that if you're not intending for an action, and it's not absolutely going to happen with each step you take. So it's true, maybe some grass is going to come up, but you have no intention for it. And it's not necessarily going to happen as you take this step. You're allowed to take each step, and that's why it's permissible. But at this point, the Gemara is going to have the two brises and try and make distinctions, even according to Rami Bar Abba, that's in the name of Ravasi, who said that you're not allowed to walk. Why these on grass? Why these one brisa says it's permissible, or one says it's not? So lo kasha. At first, you say it's not a contradiction. Ha belachim ha b'yeveshin. Depends. Fresh grass versus dry grass, and fresh grass is going to be prohibited because that's still alive and attached to the ground, and dry grass is considered already detached from the ground because it no longer is connected as a live living connection to the ground, and therefore, if you walk and it uproots it, it's not a problem. Or we could say no, both of them are talking about dry, some moist and fresh, alive grass, and nevertheless, it depends whether you're doing so in the winter or the summer. Again, in the winter, it all looks alive. It's all in the summer. Depends whether you're wearing a shoe or not. If you're not wearing shoes, then it's more likely that grass will get stuck between your toes and you'll tear it up. Or it could be that it's all talking about that you actually are wearing a shoe. Depends whether your shoe and the sole has taps or some other attachment with nails, which the grass can then get stuck in there and that will uproot it. But if you don't, so it's a smooth sole, and therefore the assumption is it won't get stuck. Or there are these points in the on the bottom of your shoe, and it may get stuck in there. The place that you're walking, is it where there's tall grass, or is it even if there's no tall grass? And so where there's tall grass, it's more likely to get uprooted and stuck in your shoe, and that's why it'll be prohibited. If there's no tall grass, then the assumption is it won't get stuck, and you're allowed to continue walking there. And Gemara says, but however, now that the Kaimalan, that we said that the halacha is Rabbi Shimon, like the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that davar she'ein mischaben, if you have no intention and you're just going about your way, and inadvertently things can happen, kulu shari, that's going to be permissible, just as you're allowed to on Shabbos do many things that you have no intention of doing and something happens. So to here, since it's not absolutely going to happen, which is called a psik ratio, removing the head and wanting the chicken to live, so to here. So this is going to be permissible according to Rabbi Shimon, and you're allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. Tomorrow we'll continue with the Agadata here on Kuf Amid Beis, and do